Yes, good afternoon. Can I start?
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
Start.
good. So my name is Tam, and I was a neuroscientist until June this year. I quit neuroscience for many reasons, but one of them is to focus on climate change, or the fight against climate change. I'm a member of Atécopol. For those who don't know, Atécopol is an association of scientists from all disciplines who come together to reflect and work on climate change and environmental concerns. And together with a couple of members, colleagues from Atécopol, I have been following the research on eco-anxiety and public debates on the same subject. I don't do research on eco-anxiety myself, but I used to do research related to human emotions. Maybe I should disclose that I'm extremely critical of emotion research. And I'm increasingly concerned about the way psychology approaches the topic of eco-anxiety. So, sorry. Okay. Climate change is understandably threatening because it leads to disasters such as the recent flood in Spain. So in the beginning, psychologists were focused on post-traumatic symptoms related to the impacts of climate change. So, for example, in 2016, Gifford and Gifford drew attention to the fact that climate-connected floods and drought are often accompanied by emotional distresses such as anxiety, shock, depression, grief, etc. But in recent years, psychologists have been shifting the focus more and more to so-called pre-traumatic symptoms, such as eco or climate anxiety. This is possibly the most cited study in recent years on eco-anxiety, or climate anxiety as it's more known in psychology. It came out in 2021 and was, and I think still is, the first large-scale study with 10,000 children and young adults between the age of 16 and 25 in 10 different countries, including France. And basically what the study found was that, yes, many young people are worried about climate change. Almost half reported that their feelings about climate change negatively affected their daily life. But the most interesting result was that the climate anxiety and the stress that they felt were correlated with what they perceived as inadequate government response, and what they felt was betrayal by the government. So this was the result that got me into eco-anxiety. I thought it was very interesting. But then when I started to read my way through the literature, I was a little bit confused. I found a lot of contradictions. So basically, all psychologists say that climate anxiety, eco-anxiety, is a normal emotional response to a genuine existential threat. But yet somehow, this normal feeling is a problem. Okay? So for example, Fritze and colleagues in 2008 wrote, a heightened level of concern to climate change is not unexpected and indeed appropriate, but some individuals experience more intense worry that causes distress and or interferes with normal day-to-day life. Similarly, Ficale in 2019 wrote, climate anxiety can be a problem if it is so intense that a person may become paralyzed But climate anxiety is not a disease. Again, just last year, Pasmore and colleagues wrote, while eco-anxiety is typically not a pathology or a disorder, it is nonetheless important that mental health professionals have this on their radar. As environmental degradation intensifies, cases of clinically significant eco-anxiety, wherein one experiences emotional, cognitive, social, or functional impairments, will become more common. Like Susan Clayton, many psychologists make a difference between adaptive and maladaptive levels of anxiety, but they do not really say where to draw the line. And like Clayton, many psychologists insist that we should not focus on individual mental health, so not to get distracted from what is necessary to address climate change, but all the psychological studies I've come across only talk about mental health. Okay. So this is the title of a recent commentary by Anna von Volkenroth. It reads, "Climate anxiety is not a mental health problem, but we should still treat it as one." So in case you don't get it, this is my reading. It's like, oh, people don't have cancer, but let's give them chemotherapy, in my opinion. According to the psychologist, because climate anxiety represents a source of distress and suffering to many and can profoundly impact day-to-day functioning, we should help people to alleviate the climate anxiety, which is, I would agree to that. But the problem is that our diagnosis on the basis of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, is necessary in many countries to receive appropriate care and to be reimbursed for it by healthcare providers. The DSM is not just a reference, the reference manual for psychiatrists and psychotherapists. It is also the reference for drug companies and many legal systems around the world. It draws the line between what is a mental disorder or not. So let me be clear. I do not criticize psychologists for wanting to help people. What I'm questioning is this is the way they should do it, okay? Because many psychologists agree and also show with their studies that feelings of anxiety can also be functional, fueling action and motivating us to address problems head on. But then in the same paper, I often read, such as here, that many psychologists think it's questionable whether action is really an antidote to anxiety. So let me explain. There is no term that describes the mental and emotional distress that women feel from being subjected to sexism on a daily basis. For the sake of argument, I've invented one, sexism anxiety. And I've substituted for climate anxiety here so that the title now reads, "Sexism anxiety is not a mental health problem, but we should still treat it as one." Applying psychologists' logic to my example, we should give women free psychotherapy where they learn to regulate, manage, and contain the emotions so to become more resilient to the daily sexism. Because apparently, they should not get politically engaged since action is not an antidote to anxiety. What I want to illustrate with this example is how a political, social, and economic condition that affects a considerable portion of the population is turned into a psychological individual problem using a vague psychiatric term, anxiety. I also believe that by keeping the focus narrowly on anxiety, psychology is contributing to a distortion of the climate change discourse. Following the tragedy in Spain, of course, there was a lot of grieving. But when the king and the queen and the prime minister visited the region, well, they did not get the emotions that we expected, like grief, of course, grief, but depression, anxiety, and etc., numbness. Instead, what they saw was that many people were very, very angry. Their anger and rage drove thousands of them into the streets to demand the resignation of the regional government. Feeling, the sociologist Ali Hochschild posits, is like seeing and hearing, is a way of knowing about the world. It is a way of testing reality. Thus, to suggest helpful techniques for changing feeling in the service of avoiding stress and making life pleasanter is to intervene with in the signal function of feeling. Of course, a person gripped by fear may make mistakes, may find reflection difficult, and may not, as we say, be able to think. But a person totally without emotion has no warning system, no guidelines to the self-relevance of a sight, a memory, or a fantasy. Drawing on Hochschild's insights, I would say that to feel fear, grief, anger, and despair in the face of environmental destructions, ecological collapse, and climate disasters help us recognizing what is important to us and what we must do to change, not us, not our emotions, but the social and political conditions that make us feel this way. Okay, but I see the neoliberal idea that individuals can green themselves and thereby green the planet as the biggest barrier to climate action. This idea is, in my opinion, a deception and a distraction. It is distracting us from what is really at stake, and that is democracy. This is going to be the last slide. Because what happened in Spain was not just the misjudgment of a government that failed to warn the citizens in time. So first of all, it is a right-wing government of climate change scenarios that has been ignoring and dismissing experts' warning until it was too late. And around the world, governments have been not just ignoring scientists, they've been very busy introducing laws that makes it difficult for scientists and citizens to protest and to put pressure on governments to take action. So here, if Darren Smith writes, just earlier this year, what the escalating anti-protest laws around the world highlight is that it is no longer only a fight by humans to mitigate a warming planet. Increasingly, with the global rise of anti-democratic governments, the fight has morphed into a battlefront constructed by far-right leaders against their own citizens. So to conclude, I think that psychologists are completely right to draw our attention to the recent rise in anxiety and other emotional and mental distresses. I think it is a phenomenon that we should look at. It is real. What I'm questioning, among other things, is whether the source of that anxiety is only climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really great. I'm a fan. Does anyone have a question in the room or online? Or maybe I can start with a question. I was wondering, do you think the reason why eco-anxiety gets so much attention is also because it might draw people away from being productive members of society in the context of the climate crisis. And so that's why people are trying to get it less political.
Yes, it's I would need an hour to answer this question, but yes, it has something to do what I said about the neoliberal idea that individuals can somehow we overburden individuals. That's the neoliberal system. Individuals have to take responsibility. And that doesn't mean just our emotions, but our life, our jobs, and etc. Yes. So it is a problem, of course, eco-anxiety for the neoliberal system, because when people don't, do what they're supposed to do, yeah. So give them a couple of drugs, and maybe they get back to work and do it better. Yeah. It's a very short answer. Okay.
Any other question?
Vous allez peut-être traduire pour moi. Je voudrais savoir comment on peut articuler la politique, donc la classe politique, ceux qui représentent la population, les sociétés, et la science, les avancées de la science et les préoccupations de la société. Comment on peut faire en sorte que toutes les productions scientifiques que nous sommes en train de faire ici puissent parler aux personnalités politiques qui sont les décideurs, en fait. Parce que la présence, j'ai suivi ça, la reine, le roi et toute la classe politique qui arrivent pour être solidaires et viennent en fait poser. En espagnol, on appelle ça postureo. On fait la photo là où les gens sont en souffrance pour être symboliquement solidaires de ces personnes-là. Mais ça n'enlève pas la réalité. En fait, comment faire en sorte que ceux qui décident soient conscients que cette réalité-là a des impacts à tous les niveaux et que lorsqu'il y a calamité, ça ne choisit pas la catégorie sociale simplement. Je ne sais pas si j'ai été claire ou je suis allée dans beaucoup de choses.
I think there are two things, I believe. The first is, of course, reflexivity, right? And by that, I don't mean just reflecting about our gender, our culture, and etc., but it's also our political motivations. This is what I find is absent in the psychological research. Psychologists don't have training in reflexivity. They don't. There's absolutely no practice or STEM science in general. And that's really a danger. So, because if you think that science is neutral, you believe that you don't have any more political motivation, but you do. And psychology, even though psychologists may not be aware of it, but contributes to neoliberalism. That's one thing. And so if you want, to give you a practical example, if you want to make this political, this psychological research political, ask political questions. Why do people feel this way? And in fact, Hickman started. They started to ask one question. It was only one question. It was the most important, that this correlation with government inaction and betrayal was super interesting, but it didn't continue. Why? Why don't we continue asking these uncomfortable questions? This is one thing. The other thing is, and I think this is really important, education. So we don't talk about climate change in academia. We don't. One of the reasons why I quit was because there was no discussion about climate change in my lab, but not even climate change, like sexism, everything. We don't talk about political questions in the lab because apparently it's not the place to ask political questions. And then the students won't learn. The students, if you don't discuss this, students won't learn. So what I'm asking you, if you teach, just bring it in. Bring in political questions. what are they going to do? Seriously. So for me, it seems, I know that it sounds simple and it's very hard to do, but these are the only two possibilities. And it is also, in my opinion, our duty to society.
Je crois. Elle a publié un livre très intéressant en français d'ailleurs, hein, intitulé Pour une écologie pirate. C'est très intéressant parce qu'elle permet que les sociétés ouvrières, les communautés ouvrières comprennent en fait l'urgence de s'intéresser aux questions environnementales. Et c'est très intéressant parce que elle part des quartiers dits populaires en France pour analyser la pertinence justement que ces communautés qui sont les premières impactées comprennent l'urgence d'avoir des pratiques écologiques. C'est très intéressant son ouvrage Pour une écologie pirate et c'est une belle solution dans tout ce qui est en train de se faire depuis la France et l'Occident en général.
Merci beaucoup. I think we might go to the next speaker now. Thank you so much.